Okay, good afternoon, and welcome to this session on building resilience in the Arab world. I'm delighted to have on the panel with me a really eminent group of speakers who will be able to provide, I think, very helpful insights on this absolutely essential topic. No matter what the growth potential is of the Arab world, and we believe that it is very, very positive, unless this part of the world, as with others, can build resilience, this growth will not be sustainable. It's a region which is particularly affected by physical as well as political and other vulnerabilities. But these are just as offset by the enormous upside potential. And I'm sure our speakers will introduce us to some of these concepts and provide perspectives which allow us to build the resilience and harness the upside. I'm going to begin the panel with introducing Brian Duperreault, and he's the President and Chief Executive Officer of Marsh McLennan Companies, which has collaborated very closely with the World Economic Forum on producing a report on the key risks of this region. And I'd like him to just begin by summarizing this very extensive research effort and highlighting to us what their conclusions are.
Thank you, Ian. I refer to the report. It's available, and I hope you do get a chance to read it. It's the Middle East and North Africa at Risk 2010. And it was an adjunct of the global risk report that's done every year for the Davos meeting, where risks global in nature are highlighted. And for this particular region, three were selected. The first one, water scarcity, I think people would understand pretty well, pertinent to this region. Energy security, maybe not so much so, but I think we've had a number of energy sessions where the issue of energy and its availability, the balance of an energy system having many faceted parts to it, whether it's fossil or renewable, becomes important. So that is a second risk. The third was a lack of infrastructure investment, and this region has put a lot of money into infrastructure, yet it's growing so rapidly that it's outgrowing even that, and I think there's as much as a 20% shortage in availability of energy, even with all the infrastructure investments. And those three become very big risks, and also an interconnectedness to them, because they run across national borders. Water availability, energy transmission makes you start to think on a regional basis, and the solutions to them, in other words, the resiliency that the region can try to create, requires somewhat of a regional response. What's not mentioned specifically in the three risks is food, but food becomes a very important part of this triangle of risks, because food production is the biggest user of water, 85%, I believe. Water itself, in this region in particular, it comes from desalinization, and that's a very energy intensive effort. Infrastructure, moving it, and the wastes of some of the infrastructure pulls down those resources. So they're all so much intertwined: water, food, energy, and infrastructure, that it becomes something you have to deal with almost in totality as opposed to separately, and it does pull you out of your country position and into some regional approach. It just demands that kind of a solution. So the report highlights those, and I know there's been a number of panels on each of these subjects, so the interconnectedness of it is something I'm trying to emphasize. And lastly, these are not the only risks faced by the region. They're the ones that we highlighted because of the significance of them. You could pick any number of other ones that we could talk about, and maybe we will. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brian, and very helpful initial introduction. The next speaker is going to speak in French, so you should have headphones, simultaneous translation, channel 1 for that. C'est un grand honneur de le ministre des Finances et Économie du Maroc, ministre Mazzour. Votre Excellence, je voudrais que vous parliez plutôt de la perspective marocaine sur cette question.
Merci. Alors,
Thank you.
on est en train de parler des
Thank
facteurs de
you. We're
risque
talking about
dans la
risk
région MENA.
factors in the
On
MENA
a soulevé 3 facteurs de
region
risque
and
importants.
three
Et il y a un
important risk
facteur partagé pour l'humanité qui est celui de l'enjeu alimentaire. Et je crois que dans sa relation avec l'eau, c'est un enjeu qui, naturellement, est un enjeu à intégrer. Et sans parler de l'enjeu de sécurité, de risques de sécurité qui concernent pas uniquement la région, mais qui concernent le monde d'une manière générale. Mais quand on parle de risques pour la région MENA, on parle également d'une région qui a d'énormes opportunités et un formidable réservoir d'atouts. Et c'est dans la capacité à combiner et à gérer par les gouvernants les deux dimensions, la dimension d'opportunité et de potentiel et la dimension de risque, dans la capacité à anticiper et de prendre conscience des enjeux et dans la priorisation, faire de sorte que les enjeux liés à des risques potentiels soient intégrés par ce que nous parlons d'éléments dont la résorption n'est pas limitée dans le temps, mais elle doit être planifiée dans le temps. Au Maroc, ces dimensions ont été intégrées dans le cadre d'une vision intégrée du développement du Maroc. L'indépendance est un facteur important, mais il n'y a pas de véritable indépendance aujourd'hui. L'indépendance reste relative compte tenu de l'interdépendance et de l'interconnexion des économies. Sur l'enjeu énergétique, le Maroc est dépendant à 96%. Nous avons construit une première vision à un horizon de 10 ans pour accélérer l'indépendance énergétique en agissant sur les énergies renouvelables. 42% de la production future en énergie sera en énergie renouvelable entre le solaire, l'hydraulique et naturellement l'éolien. Donc, à un horizon de 10 ans, l'objectif étant d'arriver à un mix énergétique 40-60, 40 énergies renouvelables, 60 énergies fossiles. Ça, c'est ce que j'appelle l'anticipation par rapport aux enjeux futurs. Nous savons que l'enjeu des énergies, particulièrement des énergies fossiles, est l'enjeu de l'humanité de demain, et donc forcément l'enjeu pour notre pays. Et dans cette perspective d'anticipation, nous agissons, c'est ce qui explique le lancement du grand projet solaire au Maroc, 2000 mégas, du grand projet également éolien de 2000 mégawatts, qui a été initié et lancé déjà hier. Sur l'enjeu de l'eau, et c'est un enjeu extrêmement sensible, le Maroc a été précurseur d'une vision anticipative. Le Maroc a été le premier à lancer la politique des grands barrages. Et c'est cette politique qui a permis à notre pays aujourd'hui, compte tenu de l'instabilité climatique qui a prévalu sur les 50 dernières années, de moins souffrir. Cette politique continue et continuera par la construction de 3 à 4 barrages par an, grands barrages, d'une centaine de petits barrages et barrages moyens. Ceci nous aide effectivement, en termes de collecte de l'eau, à avoir une collecte suffisamment importante. Deuxième dimension, qui est celle de l'agriculture. Nous sommes un pays où l'agriculture est importante, la consommation d'eau en agriculture est excessive. Dans une combinaison entre les deux dimensions, la dimension de l'enjeu alimentaire et de l'indépendance alimentaire, et de l'enjeu lié à l'eau. Nous avons combiné dans une stratégie agricole, plan Maroc vert, une vision qui va dans le sens de combiner deux éléments importants. Le premier est d'aller vers des produits à plus forte valeur ajoutée et donc de meilleure rentabilité pour le pays et pour l'indépendance alimentaire du pays, mais aussi pour l'exportation. Et deuxième élément, c'est la rationalisation de l'utilisation de l'eau. Dans cette politique, un grand effort d'investissement dans l'irrigation localisée, goutte à goutte, etc., avec des financements qui vont jusqu'à 100% par l'État, pour avoir le double effet recherché, rationaliser l'utilisation de l'eau et augmenter le rendement à l'hectare, qui se traduit par une amélioration des ressources pour l'agriculteur. Donc, deux dimensions combinées, une dimension liée au développement de la captation de ressources et une dimension liée à la meilleure utilisation des ressources. Troisième élément, c'est tout ce qui est en relation avec les développements du pays. Nous sommes un pays où il y a naturellement un développement de la population urbaine et donc forcément une plus grande. Le développement se traduit également par plus d'utilisation d'eau et par... Donc il y a de la dimension liée à l'éducation des citoyens, mais il y a aussi la politique liée à la rationalisation pour les investissements en relation avec le secteur touristique, qui est un secteur d'avenir pour le Maroc et donc fortement consommateur d'eau, et également par rapport au développement du monde urbain. Donc sur la politique de l'eau, la chose sur laquelle je veux insister, c'est la prise de conscience et la traduction de la prise de conscience par des politiques publiques et par des orientations, l'orientation des politiques publiques. Sur la troisième dimension qui a été évoquée, je suppose que c'est celle en relation avec les infrastructures, c'est ça? Alors, sur cette dimension-là, la même politique, mais en tout cas, ce qui est important pour nous, c'est que en termes de développement du réseau des infrastructures, derrière, il y a une ambition. Parce que les choix sont liés aux ambitions qu'on se fixe. Nous avons fait le choix d'une combinaison de trois facteurs importants qui sont naturellement les routes, les autoroutes, mais aussi les aspects en relation avec le transport ferroviaire. Donc, trois dimensions que nous avons intégrées. Il est vrai que les seules ressources d'un État ne sont pas suffisantes pour aller au rythme souhaité. Il faut travailler, d'abord, il faut crédibiliser. C'est ce que nous avons fait à travers des investissements massifs en infrastructures pour montrer que l'État a d'abord la capacité de constituer ce facteur d'aimant, d'entraînement pour le secteur privé. Et aujourd'hui, nous travaillons sur le partenariat public-privé pour aller vers plus de concessions en faveur du secteur privé pour accompagner l'effort entrepris par l'État. Mais derrière tout ça, l'ambition stratégique à laquelle je veux revenir quand on parle d'investissement, c'est qu'est-ce qu'on veut faire de tout ça? On peut vivre sans. Mais est-ce que l'économie mondiale aujourd'hui, est-ce que les besoins peuvent supporter une cadence qui ne soit pas la cadence en relation avec les mutations du monde et les évolutions de la région? Et c'est pour ça que l'ambition que nous avons marquée est une ambition de positionnement régional sur différents secteurs, mais aussi en tant que hub régional, parce que la géographie nous aide pour cela. Et c'est derrière ces ambitions stratégiques que nous construisons tous nos plans et nous construisons également toutes nos anticipations par rapport aux évolutions de notre région et de contraintes également liées à notre région.
Monsieur le ministre, merci beaucoup pour cette présentation intégrée. J'ai été inculpé dans le secteur de l'eau dans l'année 80-90. Je sais que vous êtes très en avance, donc félicitations sur tout cet effort. Lars Tunnel is the executive director of the IFC, chief executive, which is the major global actor in trying to mitigate risk and crowd in private sector investment around the world. And I think, Lars, for you, risk is an opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's, from the IFC perspective and the World Bank, I think we look at how can we help the countries and the companies to mitigate some of the risks. And I think the report does a good job in identifying a number of risks, water, energy, infrastructure, and we're working on all of these here in the region, trying to see what we can do to make strong companies here. And there, I think one of the key things that in the solutions here is public-private partnerships. And I'm very pleased that we, for example, are working with the Moroccan government and helping them with some of the solar project, as well as establishing a PPP unit within the finance ministry, and also trying to work on a regional basis with regional projects, because obviously there needs to be integration. I think on the water, there is some special issues. We've done some studies together with McKinsey on a worldwide basis on the water issue, and I think I'm very pleased that the report actually looks at not only the consumption of water, or not only the production of water, but also the consumption, because that is a key opportunity. Water tends to be used very freely, and I think there is huge opportunities for water efficiency, which gets me in also to the question of pricing and pricing water correctly. On the one hand, we have the UN who says that the water is a human right, and therefore some people think it should be given free completely, but obviously we can't afford to do that if we're going to manage it correctly. So I think, for example, the South African solution, where you give a certain amount free to everybody, every citizen, but if you want to fill up your swimming pool or use it for industrial processes, you have to pay a good price. But I just also wanted to highlight a few other risks that are kind of not covered in the report. I think if you look at the region as such, the demographics. Here we have a lot of young people, many of them unemployed. I think there's a tremendous need for education. We see that in the surveys that the World Bank has done, that even though you have this high unemployment, the firms feel that they don't have the right skills. So education and vocational training, I think, is one issue. The other one, we know that if you're going to get employment, you need to get the SME sector going. And here, again, lack of finance is one issue. Training is another one. So we're trying to work a lot on that with the various banks and with the government. And here, coming back to demographics, you also have the special issue of gender. So I think women entrepreneurs is an area of focus also. The other thing that I think is a risk here, or an opportunity, is the lack of regional integration. We know that the trade between the countries is very, very low. So I think what we can do here and what should be done is obviously trying to improve that. Infrastructure is one important aspect in the solution, but it goes beyond that, as we all know. And here again, we work in trying to find solutions with our trade finance programs. We try to work with South-South investments, in other words, helping companies to invest across. But also, I think a big opportunity for the region is actually to go south, to spend much more investments and catch opportunities for growth in Africa, which will be a growing region over the next number of years. And we see, for example, many of the Moroccan banks and companies that are now moving south. We see that on the Egyptian companies as well, and I think that's one very exciting opportunity. Thirdly, we have the resource dependence. Many of the countries in the region are so dependent on natural resources, especially oil, and the need for diversify, the need to think about how do we create the value added, the manufacturing sector, and how to do that. Fourthly, I think many of the countries still are in the region are in conflict or post-conflict situations. So we have invested a lot from the IFC side, for example, in Palestine. We're doing investments in Yemen. We're moving very much into Iraq right now. And finally, overlaying this whole thing, I think the whole issue of regulation. There's still lots of opportunities in the region to improve regulation, governance, And transparency, let's face it, corruption is still an issue here and as many other regions. And I think that is something that is holding investment back and is a risk going forward. So this was just a few of the thoughts, and I'd be happy to come back if you want later.
Thanks very much. So risks that aren't in the report, and then also a whole series of opportunities which we need to look at, the other side of risk, and we'll come back to this issue. Yasser El-Malawani is the Chief Executive Officer of EFG Hermes Holdings, based in Egypt, investing and thinking about risk-reward equations, I think, across the region. So fascinated by your perspectives on this.
Well, I am not Yasser. I am replacing Yasser. I'm in Yasser's shoes. I can't afford him financially, but I can afford him intellectually. So I try to put my... I'm Khalid Janahi. I was in the session this morning, actually, which touched upon the risk issues. But it's nice to do it after lunch because you can be more blunt because everybody sleeps, so you got to wake them up. I think we are in a region, I mean, I must admit, the report is excellent because I had to read the report in the morning. When I arrived at 8 o'clock, they said, you're going to get in, replace somebody. I'm the one guy who fills the gap, basically. So I was filling the gap. I had to read the executive summary. It touches upon most of the risks. But I think we are in a part of the world where I would say the single most important risk that we have is the unpreparedness to basically to have that shift, mindset shift, to accept that these are issues that we have to address. So we have to start at that level. We are in a part of the world where the opus operandi is to basically stay as we are, to have the lip service and doing a lot of things, but not really touching upon the main thing. We like to get to the penthouse from the 6th floor. We don't like to start from the base. So I think it's very, very important that that risk is addressed and addressed very, very well. So we can analyze things. Analyzing risk, getting it out is good. Having a risk manager, even governmental risk managers in different departments is a good thing. But if you do not have the preparedness to accept going forward and doing something about it, which is basically now the word reform, I'm not going to be too blunt, I'm going to use the word reform. Reform with capital letters is a very, very important factor. And reform, and when I talk, by the way, about unpreparedness to have that mindset shift, I'm talking about the full pie. I'm talking about the elites, I'm talking about the street, I'm talking about the public sector, I'm talking about the private sector. We're all guilty, whether we are, every single one out of 300 million people will be guilty. It's not like we're very good in part of the word blaming or shifting the blame to somebody else for things not to happen, for things not to be addressed. So I think it's very, very important to accept that first before we really try to attack things and fixing things. I think 3 things mentioned which are very, very important. The gender factor is a very, very important factor in this part of the world. I mean, we have 50% of our population. Truly, they are outside. But I make the blunt and provocative issue that actually it's not only 50%. We have 80% of our population out because equality, and I must admit I've been enjoying looking into the World Bank's now, the way they're looking at education by changing the word education for all for learning for all, because learning is a process which you have throughout your life rather than education, which is period of your life. So I think learning is a very important factor. Creative thinking and critical thinking are very important 2 parts of what we do. So I would not just say the gender issue for women, and I think there are women and men who are not getting equity into this community. And if we don't utilize these people, this is an opportunity, as you said, fantastic opportunity to basically create. I'm in the business of making money, and you got to look at where you're going to make money. And this is an area where it's basically we've not touched upon it at all, and it's got a fantastic opportunity. Regulations, of course. Once you accept that mindset shift, regulation becomes an important factor. It becomes basically a norm for you to basically go and do things. Legal redress. I mean, we spoke, I think it was yesterday at lunch, my brother was talking to Brian, and it was legal redress is a major factor. Why should I invest in Morocco or Algeria or Saudi Arabia or wherever when I know that I do have, okay, there's been a lot of development in the past 10 to 15 years, but we are still far from where we should be from a legal redress, because big money, from a safety perspective, from a risk assessment, goes to wherever the legal redress is a very important factor, and it has to be addressed, and to be addressed correctly. Corruption, I always say, why don't you legalize corruption? And follow the best country in the world, in Washington, lobbying is legalized, and it's corruption. It's a way of corruption. It's basically you pay taxes on it, so you can legalize corruption if you're going to go do that. So corruption is everywhere. What I'm getting at is not just here. It's ripe and across the world. And I think if you have a mindset shift from what I was getting earlier on, from a reform perspective, and reforming means you pay the price before somebody else pays the price. And I think that's a factor which we don't like. You've got to look at the mirror first thing in the morning before you go out and say what you're going to do from your side, how much you're going to pay to get things better. I think if every single mindset in our part of the world, we get them basically in a learning curve to do that, I think the corruption becomes minute. I think the risk of people basically not doing the right thing becomes minute. So most of the other things we talk about, understanding the water shortage becomes minute. But we talk about in terms of the water. I mean, the water, a lot of the water is basically wasted. Okay, because people think, okay, we don't have to pay. It's subsidized substantially, and we don't have to pay. So that, by virtue of being basically looking at it from a self-assessment perspective, you start changing and doing something about it. So I think these are very, very important things. Now, Morocco, we are in Morocco. I mean, the minister spoke about a few things. I'm a firm believer that you should invest on long term. By the way, we set something up in August 2008. Before 19th of September 2008, before the Americans and the British talking about real economy, and we said we should be concentrating on two things. The real economy for us in this part of the world are two main factors. Infrastructure, hard and soft, which is very, very important, and two is agriculture. Agriculture is a very, very important thing. And Morocco, His Majesty's basically vision for 2020, Al-Maghreb Al-Khadra, the green Morocco, is there. And by the way, sometimes when you have that vision, luck works too well. I mean, the rain has been so good to this country. They used to have rain every 2 years. I can be corrected by Aziz Ghannouch is not here, the Minister of Agriculture, but the Minister of Finance is here. You can correct me. They used to have it once every 3 years. Now, they've been so lucky that when I fly, I see Spain being basically brown, and I come across here and it's all green. So this is one thing good about the climate change. So things are coming southwards. So at least we're getting some positive thing in this part of the world. So I think that is the right way to go forward. Food security, I'm totally against what happens in terms of investing. And as much as I love Brazil, as much as I love Australia, as much as I love a lot of countries, to go and invest outside, you take your resources outside for food security purposes. I think you should be thinking again outside the box for food security from your own inside thing. Last but not least, I think this is very important. Again, it's a mindset shift. When we look at amount of money, we talk about cash generated in this part of the world. When I say this part of the world, I'm including the 300 million people. So it includes mostly basically the people who basically generate money from oil. When we see how much money is in and how much money is out, it's fascinating. I mean, being in the banking system, at best, 50% of the money is inside and 50% is outside. Now, that's very, very bad. I mean, there are certain countries, actually, 90% is money out and 10% is in. We've got to be thinking more towards, so what I'm doing, I'm developing countries, with all due respect, who are already developed by putting money into them, rather than really looking in terms of developing my own country and going forward. So I always use, and where we come from, the Gulf, everybody aspires to be Singapore. But Singapore, when we really look back in the 60s, when they decided to go forward, to leap forward, the reform decision was very, very clear, is that develop first here. Once you have overflow, you take it out. And what we have in the Arab world, we have a long way, long way to basically develop before we take the overflow out. Last but not least is opening up the borders. You cannot have, I was talking to Carlos, going to say this morning about his 400,000 vehicles that are going to come out in 2012, and how many of those will be sold in this part of the world? Because of the barriers across the Arab world, we need integration. So integration is a very, very important factor to put in. Now, that could be political, that could be naiveness, that could be old habits, but I think whether we like it or not, in 5 to 10 years down the road, we will have integration. So it's better to have integration proactively rather than having integration reactively. So I'll leave it at that. If there's any questions, I'll answer on that.
Great. Thank you very much. So an appeal for reform and creativity and integration. I'd like to pose a question to all the panelists, and then we'll open it up to the floor after that. What we're living through is a period of a tidal wave of globalization. And the message we've just heard, and I think the message we heard from all of you, is more integration will be good. More integration is good. But are there risks associated with this? More integration also brings more interdependency. Open borders also bring pandemics, cyber attacks, and many, many other things into the society. So how does one benefit from globalization while building resilience against what it also brings? So we have the global goods, and how do you manage to ensure that globalization doesn't also bring global bads to your society? Monsieur le ministre, vous voulez commencer pour Maroc?
Merci. Alors, un petit commentaire d'abord. Problème de l'ouverture des frontières. C'est d'abord de l'ouverture des mentalités qu'il faut. Et c'est l'étape nécessaire pour passer à des ouvertures beaucoup plus poussées et beaucoup plus accentuées. Le problème du monde arabe, c'est que l'ouverture des mentalités reste encore bloquée. Pour des raisons objectives ou internes à l'évolution même des sociétés arabes et à la maturité des sociétés arabes, mais la problématique, c'est que ces sociétés sont des sociétés en général en développement, une nouvelle classe de riches, tendance beaucoup plus à vouloir protéger qu'à vouloir aller vers plus de compétition ouverte, dans une vision beaucoup plus de long terme, d'investissement, de croisement, etc. Et aussi la capacité, le stade dans lequel les États sont constitués aujourd'hui et leur degré de maturité et de stabilité font que l'enjeu de l'intégration et l'enjeu de l'ouverture reste encore dans des situations difficiles à dépasser. Et c'est bien de parler de l'intégration, mais il faut revenir à la réalité objective de la maturité des sociétés et des États dans leur capacité à dépasser un certain nombre de blocages. C'est pour ça que je parle d'ouverture d'abord des mentalités, de confiance en soi et de vision par rapport aux enjeux du monde, au-delà des enjeux, du simple enjeu d'un pays. Par rapport à la question que vous avez posée, je crois que la nouvelle carte mondiale se dessine de plus en plus. Il est évident que c'est les blocs régionaux qui vont entrer en compétition et c'est la capacité des blocs régionaux à être suffisamment intégrés et suffisamment capables de créer les synergies nécessaires qui permettront à faire face aux enjeux de la compétition mondiale de demain. Quand on a un pays comme la Chine qui pèse 1,3 milliard de personnes, quand on a l'Inde avec 1,2 milliard, même des pays comme l'Union européenne avec ses 500 millions de consommateurs et ses difficultés de compétitivité et de compétition, deviendra avec le temps un espace incapable de faire face à la nouvelle réalité de la compétition mondiale. Même les espaces intégrés devront réfléchir à une logique d'intégration encore plus poussée. Et la difficulté qu'il y a, c'est que pour le monde arabe, c'est que nous sommes dans des logiques éclatées et forcément chaque pays cherche à s'intégrer dans un espace qui lui permet d'aller dans cette logique et d'anticiper également cette évolution. C'est ce qui explique les accords qu'un certain nombre de pays de la Méditerranée arabe avec l'Union européenne, c'est ce qui explique aussi les volontés d'aller vers plus d'intégration, vers le continent de demain, la croissance de demain qui est celui de l'Afrique. Et donc tout cela pousse les États et pousse les pays, et c'est le cas du Maroc, à aller vers la recherche de solutions à même d'être en phase avec les évolutions du monde et avec les réalités du monde d'aujourd'hui et de demain. Donc oui, la compétition, l'intégration est nécessaire, même avec les risques présupposés. Elle est nécessaire parce que la réalité du monde de demain sera comme ça. Et parce que la compétition du monde sera une compétition entre blocs régionaux forts. À chaque fois qu'on est plus fort, à chaque fois qu'on est plus intégré, on est en mesure d'abord d'utiliser les synergies internes et ensuite d'avoir la force nécessaire pour pouvoir faire face à des économies qui montent et qui ont une puissance beaucoup plus importante que ce qu'on peut imaginer encore aujourd'hui, parce que avec l'évolution de la démographie mondiale, avec la raréfaction des ressources naturelles, la compétition et la réalité du monde de demain sera beaucoup plus impitoyable qu'elle ne l'est aujourd'hui. Et donc, oui, il faut aller vers des intégrations, oui, il faut des prises de conscience, il faut aller vers des constructions solides. Nous avons essayé au Maroc d'avancer dans un modèle cohérent, dans une ouverture qui donne des signaux forts par rapport à notre ambition, à notre vision de la réalité du monde. Sur différentes régions, nous avançons avec un certain nombre de pays arabes qui sont dans une logique d'ouverture un peu plus poussée et qui sont conscients des enjeux, mais en même temps, nous ne nous enfermons pas dans une seule voie. On construit d'autres voies parce que c'est comme ça que nous serons capables demain de résister à une nouvelle réalité du monde qui est une réalité qui va changer vite et beaucoup plus vite qu'on le pense.
Merci beaucoup. So, a vision of integration, but with diversity of approaches and great caution. Brian, what's the perspective? You've got a global organization, you're seeing very different ways of integration. What are the lessons you learn from that for building both the opportunity but also the resilience that you need to go with it?
Yeah, but I did want to comment before I mention anything about that you know, you said, well, what are the risks or the other consequences of integration and openness, et cetera, and you mentioned cyber risk and pandemics as a couple. And I mean, the fact is, whether you do or you don't, right? Those risks are there. And so the question is the coming together, the interconnectedness of working across borders, helping you or hurting you with those particular issues. And I think, you know, given recent experience, you know, those who worked together, I think, had much better outcomes with respect to creating resiliency to some of those risks. So I think the jury isn't out. I think the jury's come forward, and you know, the vote definitely is working together is better. Now the problem with, you know, talking about the Middle East and North Africa as a region is that it's immense. Well, I had an associate fly in from Dubai, and it took him 10 hours to get here. So the question of what are natural regions and when does it make sense to work together and when doesn't it make sense to work together, you can't just force a region to be a region if there isn't some natural reason for their existence. I mean, there's much of an argument for a Mediterranean region with Morocco connected to Spain and France, et cetera, then possibly all the way out to the Gulf. And so I think we have to be much more flexible. I think these regions, and I agree with the minister, the regions are going to be created, but they're not going to be blocks because there's just some unnaturalness to that. It doesn't make any sense to me, and I just don't think it has legs. When you think about resiliency and interconnectedness, I was saying, well, you know, so what's worked out there? I mean, give us some examples that we can point to and say, try this out. And you know, you'd have to look at the EU as a classic example. You know, in my lifetime, practically it went from war, you know, warring. I mean, there were no more warlike groups than the Europeans in near term. You know, we think about security risks in this region, but there were pretty significant security risks in Europe for a very, very long time, and yet they came together. Now, part of that was there was a common threat, which I guess got people to begin to cooperate. But here is, you know, in a 60-some year period, an amazing transformation of very insular, almost, war and a lot of animosity between the two to cooperation. Some of it, as I said, is because there was a common threat, but then becomes common interest. Now, it's hard to foresee a time when you'd have a common currency here. Of course, there's some question about a common currency even in the EU these days, and you give up sovereignty and everything. But these threats, I think, the important is the recognition of these threats and whether their threats are significant enough that cooperation makes sense. And the problems with some of these things is when it's too late, you know, it becomes obvious. Water issues and energy security, I think, are things that really are so significant. They do require a recognition of these risks, as you mentioned. You know, just to say, you know, this is important. And yeah, we all would rather not to have to deal with things. You know, we'd all rather, you know, do the routine rather than tackling some of these almost intractable issues. But if there's a recognition that this is a problem, now is the best time to do it, because it will be a problem, and then it may be too late. So that's what, you know, kind of a wake-up call is probably the best way for me to put it.
Yep.
Hope that helps.
So now is the best time, but we don't have any money to manage our risks, and we've got our eyes on different bulls.
I don't know.
Can the IFC help manage these risks of integration, Lars?
Sure. I think first of all, I you know, as a matter of philosophy, yes, if you're integrated, you may have some risks on top of what you have, which are different from if you're totally isolated from the world. But I think if you're going to have development, you need to integrate. I think one of the things we've seen, I very often use the example of mobile phones. Those mobile phones who helped integrate the small farmers, so they got information about prices, so they have a chance to actually start to earn something on their agriculture. So I think the question is, how can we integrate more people into the global economy, but do it in a reasonable way? Mm-hmm. And I think we got a unique situation now when we have these multiple poles of growth in the world. So you can actually diversify, and if you look at North Africa, for example, it's not only a question anymore of just exporting to Europe. It's a question of, as I mentioned earlier, Africa. It's a question of upgrading your products, and for example, in the agriculture sector, not only export the vegetables, but to have food processing and other things that allows you to have more of value added locally. So diversification, both in the terms of value added, in terms of products, in terms of trading partners, I think you build in some of that resilience. I think also in terms of integration, I think the point that was made by Brian on that to a large extent some of the issues, some of the mega risks here in this region are related to kind of common goods. Water is, I think, the most clear example with the aquifers that are, you know, they know what borders we have between countries. They are cutting across, so they have to be addressed on a regional basis. I think these are important things. On your question of can IFC help, and the answer is yes. We're trying to help integrate. We're trying to get companies to go up the value chain. We're trying to create trade finance products or access to finance through the banking systems. I mentioned the South-South things we're doing. And in particular to risk management, we're trying now to work with some of the big insurance companies in the world and bring in, for example, weather insurance for small farmers or agricultural companies. These are the type of tools that I think actually is also the benefit of integration, in the sense that if we can take global products like that and bring them into the local market, that will help mitigate some of these risks that otherwise would occur.
Great. I very much welcome the perspectives of creativity and reform. I think the only thing I wouldn't agree with is the optimism on climate change. I've seen the projections for this region, and they're terrifying, actually, looking out 20, 30, 40 years. So I think if there is rain, enjoy it while it lasts. The longer term is, I think, going to build a lot of new problems on that. But do you feel there are things that governments could be doing to build resilience to integration? And I think we all share in common a desire for much greater integration, and recognize that without it, there's no hope for future growth and resilience. At the same time, I think we recognize that it brings with it risks. And which would you see as the main risks, and how would you build resilience?
Long time ago, a wise man told me something, and I remind myself of this actually every week these days. I kept it for a long time. I was not listening to myself, but then now I fear and I remind myself. It looks like I'm going to do it every day. And that was, if you are in a group of 50 make sure you're not in the top 5, make sure you're not in the bottom 5. The problem we have now, and what I see, is that we are getting to be number 49. And once you are number 50, you are finished and gone. So I think that's what's facing us. That's what I see in 10 to 15 years down the road, that we will be at the end of basically the queue. And if we don't fix things now and work on it now, yes, there is the cultural factor between North Africa and South Europe. That is definitely the case, as is the case between Turkey and Europe. But when you look at it from a grouping perspective, whether we like it or not, Morocco is much more part of the Arab world than it is part of Europe. I know I have a lot of this discussion with my Moroccan friends. It gets into a very intellectual perspective, but in reality, when it comes to life going forward, yes, Morocco will benefit a lot by being a bridge to West Africa and rest of Africa. And already some of the institutions in Morocco, actually, some of the banks, they've been so clever, they've realized this, that they've done this by virtue of opening up across Africa and getting basically Europe and Africa together. We are in the business of airlines, and they were the first actually to have an open sky policy with the European Union, were the Moroccans, because they realized they can use that as a bridge for West Africa and the rest of Africa. That, I would say, is basically a uniqueness that you're going to use for purposes of business, but that's not an integration. For me, integration is whether they like it or not, they have to work together. Just to give you an example, for argument's sake, now FTA with the United States. We have 22 Arab countries, okay, it's 21, some people say 22. I am with the 22 countries in the Arab world. Now everybody's running to get an FTA with the United States. Just sit back and, as a common person who looks at it from a logical perspective, if all the 22 were going as one FTA with the United States, look at what the advantages they would have had from that perspective. Now, these are the things that I'm trying to capture. If we had one central bank across the Arab world, one regulator for the financial institution across the Arab world, what benefits we will get overall. Today, when I talk about it, because I'm in the financial institution business, we have so much wealth in the Gulf. When I look at it, actually, all our banks put together, and here is where I basically reverse what Churchill said, never so few damage so many, and I'm talking about the small little banks who got supported by TARP in the United States or got supported by their governments in UK or elsewhere, who are serving and living and everything else, and 200 or 300 institutions in the United States just wiped off out of the map because of those guys. They are still there. The reason they are there because they're too big to fail. It was proved to us too big to fail was an issue. Now, in the Arab world, we don't have a single bank which can match these banks. Now, I've been pushing, I've been talking, and everybody laughs. I've been saying it for 10 years. Hey, guys, we got to merge. We got to basically we got to integrate. We got to put our resources together across borders, in the country, and across border. And who listens? Nobody listens, simply for one reason, because it comes back to what I said initially. The mind shift is the mindset perspective is not shifting because everybody wants to be a chairman, everybody wants to be a CEO, everybody wants to be so that perspective still stays there. So if we do not go back to the basics, I can bring it back to we get nowhere. So still for me, the biggest risk is the basics.
Okay, great. It's an opportunity for you all to engage with the panel. Please call for the microphone. You can ask questions in the different languages, French, Arabic, or English. Just give us a chance to adjust our headsets if you do want to ask in those languages, and please identify yourself. This is an on-record and I think live webcasted panel, so don't say anything that you wouldn't like to be on the web forever. Without trying to constrain or cramp your style. It hasn't stopped us at all. The gentleman over here is first.
Thank you, Ian. My name is Frans Bouwen, the Hague Process on Refugees and Migration. A very short question, but I'm very curious to know, in this particular region, is the issue of migration a risk or an opportunity, a challenge, particularly when we look forward into the future? I also ask this because there are a lot of expectations in order to see how to give innovative responses to upcoming generations which will have to deal with migration. And many in the world today are looking to this particular region to see whether they can give us some new guidance. Thank you.
Thanks, Franz. And I'm sorry I didn't recognize you. The light's on my eyes. But good to see you here. Who'd like to take a question on the role of migration in building more dynamic and resilient societies, but also some of the other issues associated with controlling migration flows? Perhaps this is a question that the Minister of Finance and Economy may not want to answer, but should answer.
Je réponds.
Ouais, si vous pouvez.
Alors, je réponds par rapport d'abord à mes convictions. Le phénomène migratoire est porteur de progrès. Le brassage est porteur de progrès. Quand on est, et on se dit qu'on est dans un monde qui se globalise, qui s'ouvre, et qu'on rejette le phénomène migratoire, c'est qu'il y a un problème. Il faut de la cohérence. Et la cohérence veut que quand on va vers une logique de globalisation, la globalisation économique est accompagnée par la globalisation des autres phénomènes l'accompagnant. Et ce n'est pas parce qu'il y a eu des échecs d'intégration des phénomènes que nous pouvons considérer que le phénomène est problématique. Nous savons qu'au Maroc, et c'est un élément d'anticipation, que c'est un phénomène que nous serons appelés à vivre avec nos frères africains. Et nous travaillons déjà, parce que c'est une évolution naturelle. On ne peut pas dire qu'on est un pays qui a envie d'avoir une connexion économique, parce qu'on a déjà une connexion politique et historique et spirituelle suffisamment avancée. On ne peut pas dire qu'on veut être un pays avec une connexion économique forte avec le reste des pays africains et avoir un comportement d'autarcie par rapport à un phénomène naturel qui est un phénomène de migration entre les populations. Les Marocains ont vécu en Afrique, dans les pays africains, et ils ont été intégrés dans les sociétés africaines. Ce phénomène de rejet, nous ne l'avons pas dans nos cultures. Et donc forcément, nous allons dans une démarche pour encourager le brassage et le mixage. Le monde a besoin de ça. C'est un des éléments et des facteurs de stabilité du monde de demain. Plus on est capable d'intégrer les sociétés, plus on est capable d'intégrer les différences, plus l'humanité avancera. L'humanité ne peut avancer qu'avec l'intégration des différences et non pas par le rejet des différences.
Monsieur le ministre, merci pour cette réponse très, comment on dit, politically brave, mais dans le sens absolument correct, avec une perspective mondiale et pas seulement xénophobique. Nous avons besoin beaucoup plus de politiciens dans le monde comme vous, surtout en Europe. The gentleman over there.
Francis Guillas, la Fondation CIDOB. Pour rebondir sur les propos du ministre, quand on regarde les conflits, par exemple en Afrique du Nord, pour ne prendre que cette région, je pense qu'on oublie trop souvent qu'en Europe et en Occident, on a beaucoup encouragé ces conflits dans le passé. Et qu'aujourd'hui, devant le changement de la donne internationale, au contraire, on dit non, il faudrait que ces gens ouvrent leurs frontières et soient unis. Donc je crois qu'il ne faut peut-être pas oublier l'histoire de ce point de vue-là. Et sur ce plan-là, il y a deux questions, pas seulement pour le ministre. La première, c'est si l'Europe, notamment, puisqu'elle est en première ligne, au lieu de prendre une attitude vis-à-vis des pays de la rive sud, comme quoi ce serait la première ligne de défense, on a toujours l'impression qu'il y a des menaces, qu'elles soient migratoires, l'islam, le terrorisme, enfin j'en passe. Si l'Europe prenait politiquement l'attitude que l'Afrique du Nord faisait partie de la solution de son problème de voisinage, plutôt que d'être constamment une source de menaces de tout genre, bon, est-ce que cela ne permettrait pas de poser certaines questions avec un autre état d'esprit, à place plutôt qu'un minus, hein. La deuxième chose concerne les relations, enfin j'avais posé une question sur le gazoduc entre l'Algérie et le Maroc, qui est en fait relativement peu utilisé. Mais nous nous sommes livrés à un exercice au CIDOB il y a quelques mois, avec d'ailleurs en compagnie de l'OCP. On a essayé de regarder comment pourrait-on remettre l'Afrique du Nord sur la carte économique du monde, en prenant par exemple, vous prendrez le gaz et les phosphates. Alors je sais que c'est illusoire politiquement pour le moment, mais peu importe. Si on pouvait combiner ces deux choses, on ferait en Afrique du Nord, on pourrait avoir une industrie de fertilisants dont les coûts seraient les moins chers du monde. Et quand on sait les besoins en fertilisants qu'il y aura dans les années à venir, dans les décennies à venir, donc je pense que l'aspect politique de cela, comme je dis, on parle des conflits entre les pays du Sud, mais on oublie aussi l'attitude des pays du Nord pendant très très longtemps. Dernièrement, simplement une remarque à propos des mentalités dans le monde arabe. J'avoue qu'en me déplaçant en Afrique du Nord, j'ai souvent l'impression que les peuples sont plus mûrs ou plus matures que certains de leurs dirigeants. J'ai l'impression que beaucoup de ces querelles sont des querelles de dirigeants. Quand on parle aux gens dans la rue, à Oujda, à Tlemcen, je vous assure qu'on entend exactement les mêmes propos. D'ailleurs, on entend les mêmes propos en Algérie sur les Marocains et les Tunisiens, au Maroc sur les... Bon, je pense que c'est les populations, les classes moyennes sont en fait beaucoup plus mûres. Et toute cette histoire de mentalité arabe, de culture arabe, moi je ne suis pas sûr que notre culture, notre mentalité en Europe ailleurs soit tellement plus avancée ou évoluée que dans le monde arabe. C'est un sentiment personnel.
Monsieur le ministre.
Je pense que c'est une réponse. La réponse mérite d'être donnée par notre ami. Et puis j'y réagirai après.
So who's going to respond?
Do you want to respond, Brian? Or do you want to go? Why don't you go first at the end?
I think the point about the mindset perspective, and when we say that, this is the point that I'm going to touch upon, the mindset factor, that here is much more better than it is in Europe. Actually, that is a very important point that you're raising, and it is. We are very smart people. And the problem is once we are very smart people, and we are very trade-oriented people, and with all this trade-oriented people, and with all this smartness, and we are so backward when it comes to our economy, you got to put a question mark why this is happening. And the reason it's happening because we don't want to accept what I was saying about reform perspective. And I don't want, I'm as a trader, I want to keep everything for myself. I want to always be the chairman of my bank. I want to always be the head of whatever I am. I want to always be the guy who has, I want to always have the best wife in the world. You know, that is what we have. So that is part of smartness because I'm clever. I want to have that. But I'm forgetting that 50, 60 years down the road, all this, what I'm doing now, is going to have a damage on me. And what's happening today, and the reason we are damaged, because 50 or 60 years down the road, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, were so smart, keeping everything for themselves, rather than thinking for the future, that I should be out and getting there and being much better than the Europeans and everywhere else from perspective going forward economically and actually intellectually. So I think it goes to the other side. So that's much more frustrating for me that I'm clever, but the guy up north there, he is much more open, he is economically much better, he can see things going forward, there's a vision, they can work through things out, he knows what his children, at least 50 years down the road, 30 years, the country where it's going, I can have my children going the right education, the right learning process. We don't have that. So that was negative rather than positive and makes me much more frustrated than I was before.
The gentleman over here.
Merci, je vais parler en français. Je suis Mohamed Chafiqi du ministère de l'économie et des finances au Maroc. Le débat que nous avons entendu aujourd'hui est très riche. Cela me suggère une idée somme toute simple, c'est que le monde de demain sera basé sur de nouveaux paradigmes. Et les risques qui ont été évoqués posent la problématique de la durabilité. C'est dans ce cadre que je voudrais poser une question, parce que notre conviction, ça a été relaté dans le discours de Sa Majesté qui a été adressé au Forum, sur la question de la durabilité également, en termes d'intégration sociale. Un des enseignements de la crise sur les dernières années, c'est que quand même, il y a eu de grands écarts sociaux dans le monde et à l'intérieur des pays. À commencer par, je ne sais pas moi, ce qui s'est passé aux États-Unis durant les 20 dernières années. Donc ma question est la suivante. Aujourd'hui, dans les pays émergents, si vous voyez ce qui se passe du côté du Pacifique, une bonne partie du PIB mondial se jouera là-dedans. Mais en même temps, il y a ce paradoxe. Les 2/3 des vulnérables se retrouveront également de ce côté-là. Alors, la question de la stabilité, et ça concerne la région MENA, des équilibres sociaux, du rôle des classes moyennes, du rôle de l'enseignement dans la promotion sociale, me semble être des éléments déterminants pour la stabilité de demain et pour fonder un nouveau modèle plus équilibré, plus durable, plus intégrateur. Quelle est votre réaction sur ces questions? Merci.
Est-ce que la question est posée à quelqu'un ou à la panel? Oui. Who'd like to have a go? Brian, do you want to come in, or Lars?
Well, maybe I can start. I think one of the things we've seen there is a couple of shifts that you mentioned. One is this after the crisis now, a world with multipolar growth. Another one is if we look at what are the countries that has been able to develop over the last 30 years, and if you look at of course East Asia, we see that very much it has been a question of market-driven economies, and that has taken 1 billion people out of poverty. But as you point out, we still have the majority of the world's poor are in middle-income countries, and that gets to the point that we at the World Bank and IFC strongly believe in is that you need to have inclusive growth. It's not enough with just a few people at the top getting the benefits of growth, because you need that to have a homogeneous society there where everybody will have a benefit, and that will reduce the risks going forward and create the possibility of democracy, and create the opportunity really for the full utilization of all the people in the country. And on top of that, from a pure profit point of view or market point of view, that would also create consumers that can help this sustainable local growth. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing right now is the issue of, everybody's now saying they're going to export more, and as I think Martin Wolf wrote in one of his articles, that where will we all sell to? Is it to Mars, or where is all the exports going to go? and I think so. We need to have more domestic growth in the various countries, and that has to come from an inclusive growth. And that's what we at IFC are working very hard to try to help countries to do.
Brian, did you want to come in on this?
No, I certainly couldn't argue with that. When I think about the growth, particularly in this region, there's been a lot of efforts to diversify economies, and I think that makes all the sense. If from a risk management point of view, which is kind of what I do for a living, diversification is a fundamental risk management tool. And so diversifying economies, having them inclusive, makes all the sense in the world. But there are some consequences of that, and if you diversify into an high energy using industry, you have energy that seems like a good idea, but at some point you become dependent on that industry, and all of a sudden you don't have those natural resources. So I'm particularly interested in economies where the human resources are most focused on, and I think Morocco's doing an excellent job in that area. And this whole question of education and human capital development is really to me the fundamental answer to this question of stability. That if you can get the countries, that's inclusiveness, because you have the population involved. So the industries that are too dependent on, not dependent on people, too dependent on other things that could disappear on you, I think maybe in the long term aren't the best interest of the country.
Yeah. So people are the renewable resource.
Correct.
The gentleman in the middle here? Yeah.
Building on what Mr. Duperreau was just saying, and building on what Morocco is doing today to become 40% independent and not using fossil energy and using sustainable energy, Mr. Minister, couldn't you become the sponsor or the champion of promoting such policies in the MENA region altogether? because we were talking about integration, and the culture of using durable, sustainable energies is still not part of what we are. You know, we are living in sun countries. I mean, but the model that you are building just now, that will start in 2 years' time, could be a model for all the Arab world. Couldn't you do that for the Arab world? I mean, become the champion of promoting this code for everybody. I mean, devenez les prophètes, devenez les champions et les parrains de tout ça dans les pays arabes. Est-ce que c'est un wishful thinking? Vous pouvez le faire.
Écoutez, moi, je crois à une seule chose, à la preuve des faits. On agit, on démontre que c'est possible. Et nous sommes convaincus que de toutes les manières, le monde arabe et le développement des énergies futures dans le monde arabe vont se faire autour des énergies solaires essentiellement. C'est toujours aux pionniers d'avoir le courage de le faire. Et je pense que Sa Majesté le Roi a eu le courage de le faire, d'initier et d'engager un projet discuté aujourd'hui partout, mais personne ne commence véritablement en faisant des projets sérieux. Nous sommes en train de parler de 2000 mégawatts. Un site lancé hier avec 500 mégawatts en 2 étapes. Donc on est en train de rendre la vision une réalité. Et je pense que tout le monde attend les effets de démonstration. Il y a les pionniers et il y a les suiveurs. Dans cette affaire-là, on est des pionniers. Et je pense que de toutes les manières, au niveau des autres pays, et beaucoup de pays vont suivre cette dynamique. Quand on voit les évolutions et les enjeux même par rapport au continent européen demain, des enjeux liés à la société civile et la pression des sociétés civiles par rapport aux énergies nucléaires, etc., etc., on est certain que ce pari que nous avons pris va être un pari réussi. Je ne voudrais pas blesser mon ami, à qui je n'ai pas apporté de réponse tout à l'heure, tout simplement pour dire que le problème n'est pas un problème de culture, le problème est un problème de mentalité. Quand j'ai parlé, et on a évoqué tout à l'heure l'histoire de l'ouverture des frontières, j'ai commencé par dire qu'il faut d'abord ouvrir les mentalités. C'est là où il y a les rigidités encore, liées peut-être à des niveaux de maturité des sociétés et au niveau d'évolution des classes qui constituent les mutations et le développement des sociétés. Et ce brassage, ou en tout cas ces courants, traversés par au niveau du monde arabe, entre le courant moderniste et le courant conservateur qui est encore là, avec ses pesanteurs, avec tout ça, fait qu'un certain nombre d'évolutions, en tout cas en termes de rythme, reste encore constitue une difficulté. Vous avez parlé du gazoduc Maroc-Europe, Algérie, Maroc-Europe. Il y a ce gazoduc aujourd'hui, mais on est en train en même temps de construire un autre gazoduc Algérie-Europe. Pour vous dire, le gaspillage des ressources qui existent par un manque d'intégration ou par un manque de volonté, parce qu'il y a un problème dans le monde arabe. Un vrai problème dont le dépassement a fait le succès des espaces intégrés, entre autres l'Europe, c'est cette mutation vers une culture de gagnant-gagnant. C'est cette mutation qui n'est pas encore arrivé à opérer dans nos États, et particulièrement dans les États arabes. Quand quelqu'un gagne, ça veut dire que moi je perds. Quand moi je gagne, ça veut dire que l'autre perd. Et donc, on est enfermé encore dans cette culture du fait des mentalités qui restent encore dominantes au niveau de nos sociétés. Le jour où on passera à une culture gagnant-gagnant, beaucoup de choses vont changer dans le monde arabe. Donc le problème n'est pas un problème de culture, c'est un problème de mentalité.
The importance of the demonstration effect, both on energy and also on shifting society through one's actions and beliefs. The gentleman over there.
Hello, good evening. I will be asking my question in Arabic because my mother is going to watch me and she won't understand. السلام عليكم. سؤالي لمعالي الوزير وللسيد جناحي. انتوا اثنيناتكم تحكوا مع بعض. نحن بنعرف انه وحدة عربية ما راح تصير وانا عايش يمكن بعدين الله اعلم. اكيد ما راح تصير لانه عارفين الوضع اذا بدها تشتي غيمت وما عم بتغيم بالوطن العربي. معالي الوزير تحدث بشكل واضح عن تكتلات إقليمية، حتى التكتلات الإقليمية بالوطن العربي صعبة تصير بالظروف السياسية. بالمغرب العربي ما بتلائم، بالشرق الأوسط ما بتلائم أبدا، وبالخليج العربي بعد خروج دولتين من الوحدة النقدية كمان ما بتساهم. فشو الحل إذا السيدة جناحي بتمثل واحدة من أكبر المؤسسات المالية بالوطن العربي وإلك يعني دخول على أكثر من بلد عربي وتعرف الظروف، ومعالي الوزير أكيد أنت عندك علاقات سياسية مع معظم الدول العربية، فوين الحل؟ يعني نحن اليوم نحكي عن المشاكل ونعرف المشاكل واضحة، شو هو الحل؟ هل هي تكتلات مش إقليمية ولا عربية، تكتلات اقتصادية يعني لا تعتمد على الجغرافية؟ إذا الجزائر والمغرب ما عم تزبط معهم، العراق وسوريا ما عم تزبط معهم، خليها تزبط مثلا بين المغرب وسوريا، أو سوريا، أنا سوري فحط اسم سوريا في أي تكتل إن شاء الله. ومستر جناحي، هل عندكم استثمارات بسوريا قريبا واستثمارات بالSMEs؟ أنا بعرف قلت لي لا، بس يمكن تعيد النظر في موقعك هلا. شكرا.
Okay. Okay. May I suggest to those that can speak Arabic that you respond in Arabic so his mother can understand, and the rest of us will.
I can respond in Urdu, yes, because my mother will be watching, so she understands Urdu.
Let me ask the minister to respond first. The minister. Okay.
En arabe ou en français?
Arabic, if you.
In
yeah.
Arabic. أولاً أنا من طبعي مش متشائم. التفاؤل هو اللي يحرك دائما ويساعد على تجاوز العقبات. أنا أعتقد بأنه تعدد التجارب داخل العالم العربي، تجربة دول الخليج في اندماجها رغم الصعوبات هي تقدم. التجربة التي نعيشها مع مصر، تونس والأردن في إطار اتفاقية أجادير كاين هناك تقدم وتقدم كبير. 5 أو 6 سنوات من الوراء كانت هناك صعوبات، وزميلي في تونس متواجد معنا الأستاذ رضا شلغوم، مرحبا بك. كانت هناك صعوبات واستطعنا بالإرادة السياسية وبفضل القطاع الخاص، بفضل القطاع الخاص وعمل القطاع الخاص وتحرك القطاع الخاص وانفتاح القطاع الخاص، استطعنا أن نتجاوز كثير من الصعوبات كانت موضوعة بشكل ثقيل وبشكل كبير. لهذا أعتقد بأن التجارب وتنوع التجارب التي نعيشها اليوم بين الدول اتفاقية أجادير هي تجربة في اعتقادي بدأت تنضج، ونضج النماذج ونضج التجارب هو الذي سيساعد كذلك على إدماج دول أخرى راغبة في يعني الانخراط في هذا النوع من التكتلات. التكتل ليس مرتبطا ضروريا بالحدود وارتباط الحدود. أعتقد بأنه وسائل النقل اليوم وتعدد وسائل النقل أصبحت يعني كافية لتجاوز صعوبات مرتبطة بالحدود. إذن أنا متفائل رغم الصعوبات. وهناك شيئين يجب أن ندفع بهما. هناك الأصوات التي لها رؤية مرتبطة بواقع العالم وتطور العالم، ويجب لهذه الأصوات أن تنظم نفسها. تنظيم الأصوات الفاعلة داخل المجتمعات هذا نقطة يجب أن نتقدم ونشتغل فيها على المستوى العربي. هذا جانب. الجانب الثاني هو بالطبع كل ما هو مرتبط بالقطاع الخاص ودور القطاع الخاص على المستوى المغاربي. مثلا القطاع الخاص عبر لقاءات منظمة مستمرة بدأ يفرز مجموعة من التجارب المشتركة، شركات موحدة، استثمارات موحدة، دخول في أسواق المالية مشتركة. إذن هناك بداية تحول إيجابي في انطلاقا من تجارب وتراكمات، وما يعني في الواقع هي غيرتنا بارتباط مع واقع العالم العربي وفرص وطاقات وقدرة ويعني قوة العالم العربي الغير المستعملة اليوم هي التي تدفع بنا أن نستعمل كذلك كلمات قوية لأننا نحن في حاجة إلى ذلك اليوم.
I'm going to answer in English because I don't want his mother to listen to what I'm going to say. I'm going to be very nasty to her. Actually, this is case to the point. I mean, a young man, intelligent. This morning he raised a very, very intelligent question. He's raised just an intelligent question now. But it tells you that he has given up on what we have and what the potential that we have. I mean, by saying what he said, that actually shows a lot of pessimism from his perspective. Now, as a realist, the way I look at, I think, comes back to the point of a catalyst or an example or being a sham'a that everybody will look at and everybody wants to follow. I think if we just look at the past 10 years globally, the gap between rich and poor has widened so much. And something called middle class has been eroding big time. The problem in our part of the world, in the Arab world, that we had a small middle class 10 years ago, today is so thin that it's just gone. And we all know, any good economist knows that a sustainable society, and a solidified society without the backbone of a middle class is dead and finished. So I think the most important factor here is to create middle class and use examples that we have. I mean, Turkey. Just look at Turkey 10 years ago. Turkey was the other way around. Turkey had basically, there was the gap so big. You had the 7 families at the top and you had everybody else at the bottom. In between, they were basically very thin line of nobody. Today, the Anatolians have all come to Istanbul. The 7 actually, they become 15. They were single billionaires. Now they are double billionaires in terms of the amount of money. So they've realized to open up. They've made money out of it. So the economy has flourished. The dead economy, which was hidden, has come up. So there's nothing, everything is formal. Most of it is formal now in Turkey. So why don't we look at our neighbors as good examples for us to do? I think you can invest as much money you want in curricula and everything else in education. I think there are 2 factors. To have a real entrepreneurship mindset. Without middle class, you're not going to have it. It's not going to work. You cannot have a middle class if you don't really open up and allow the creative thinking and allow people to come and be part of the overall economy. It's not going to happen. So I think the first thing you got to do is basically bring your middle class back. And if we don't do that, forget it. We're going to be here for another 20 or 30 years. And that's what I was saying. We are number 49. My worry is, quick, we're going to get to 50, because even sub-Saharan Africa is moving very, very fast. And they're going to be basically crossing us very, very soon if we're not very careful. So I think middle class, if there's anything to leave it here as what is the catalyst that we should leave out, and rather than being countries to be looked at as an example, we should have basically the middle class of each of these places to be the thing that we look at, the light that shines, that gives the door for everybody to go forward as young people who aspire to get somewhere, I think is the middle class issue. And how we do that, I think it's important. I don't think it takes that much. I think it needs, basically, coming back to what I said at the beginning, is the mindset shift, and we got to do it. And by the way, we've yet to invest in Syria. I didn't want to answer, but we've yet to invest in Syria, but Syria is a very, very good place to invest these days.
Last part of the question, I think, was also for you. What can the international institutions do or are doing in integration?
Well, as I said earlier, we are working both on integration in terms of regional infrastructure projects, bringing best practice between the countries. We're working with the financial sector. As I mentioned, I think we're working with a number of the Moroccan finance institutions going south and going also some others going across the region. So I think there is a number of things, but more importantly, I think we're also working in trying to bring in help to create this middle class, because that's something that I think the inclusiveness, as I mentioned earlier, is so critical, whether it's working on the education or whether it's working on creating jobs, creating that entrepreneur, that SME, whether it's a man or a woman. And very often it should be the women are the strong ones, and helping that happen. That's what we are all about.
Great. Well, we've had a fascinating session, and I'm afraid there's no more time for any more questions. I'm sorry about that, but maybe you can get the panelists bilaterally afterwards. what's really impressed me about this conversation is how it's gone from culture and our minds to the real hardware of energy systems, solar panels, water systems and dams, and everything in between across the whole region. And I think that speaks to the need to really have integrated and joined up thinking in the way one thinks about this. I think we all share a passion to make globalization more inclusive, to make it work effectively for the poor and for others that are left out of the current benefits, but also a belief that globalization and integration is the only way. There is no alternative to that, except going back and trying to become a North Korea, I suppose. And that's not an option that anyone is entertaining. So the question is, how does one build the resilience along the way? How does one learn quicker? And the emphasis we also had on learning was extremely important on that. And also, how does one become more flexible? Flexible as well in the way as we think about our regional blocks, our integration benefits, and also how we can move our societies. Thank you all for your tremendous engagement, and thanks to this panel for what I think has been an extremely rich and helpful set of both initial comments and then conversation along the way. So thanks to you all, and do pick up a copy of the report if you like it, like to on the way out, and do remember that actively go forward building links, but also building resilience. Thank you.